monatomic gold, for those people who have never heard of it, is simply gold in its most elemental form. As a substance, it can be any one of the platinum group metals, actually, transition group 1, as they're called, the noble metals, which are deemed to be just one element, of which gold is one. So is platinum, palladium, iridium, rhodium, ruthenium, osmium. I mean, all of these transition group 1 metals that should be nothing else but what they are, can be transposed into this monatomic state. And what actually happens is that through the process of changing its substance, effectively the metallic content of the gold or the platinum disappears, and one is left with a white powder. And the white powder doesn't anymore analyze as the metal that it came from. It simply analyzes as a very strange form of silica. And it looks like a very strange form of silica. It's a very fine powder that is so fine you can lose it within your fingerprint. You know, it's like talc, very, very fine. And the history of this is quite astonishing, because it came to the fore in the 1970s when it was discovered purely by chance on some farmland in Arizona, when a farmer was very, intrigued to discover what this strange substance was that he was finding in his soil, and went through a series of processes at various laboratories and whatever to analyze this stuff, and some of the strangest stories have come out of these analysis tests, and some of the funniest stories actually. But eventually they discovered that it was a form of gold or platinum in this monatomic single element state. Now the interesting thing is that if one looks at the periodic table of elements, that there are actually some empty squares in boxes within the table where these substances fit exactly where they should go, but there's nothing in there. Nobody knew about the fact that gold could be anything but gold. And this began to intrigue me. I went over to America. I met the people involved. I met lots of the people involved in various parts of the research. Saw for myself the transposition, and discovered really that this is very, very much like some of the things that were discussed back in very ancient times. The thing that struck me first of all was the story of Moses and the golden calf.
Yes.
From the book of Exodus. And I thought, this is the same thing. You know, Moses came down from the mountain and got very angry because his brother had made this golden calf out of earrings and things which he'd taken from the Israelites at the bottom of Mount Sinai, and made this golden calf. And Moses had just been up the mountain seemingly talking to God and come down with the Ten Commandments and got very angry. And then it says that, in fact, I'll use the older text rather than the modern text, because but modern Bibles have different interpretations. But the old text says that he consumed the golden calf with fire, transposed it into powder, mixed the powder with water, and fed it to the Israelites. I thought, this is kind of weird. You know, he consumed it with fire. Now, modern Bibles say burnt it with fire. Well, that's not such a good word as consumed, because consumed means digested rather than burned.
Yes.
So there's a transposition process which was being described in the Bible where this gold became this strange powder, which he fed to the Israelites. Going further back in time, one finds Egyptian writings about exactly the same thing. Now, in 1904, the English archaeologist William Flinders Petrie was out in Sinai mapping the area for the Egyptian Exploration Fund, and they found this mountain which they figured was probably the mountain of Moses, the one called Mount Horeb in the Bible. And lo and behold, when they climbed to the top of it, unbeknown to scholars, historians, even more or less unbeknown to the Bedouin of the area, 2,500 feet up this mountain, they found the remnants of what they thought was an old temple. Well, they spent a lot of time digging away rubble and eventually uncovered this amazing temple on the top of a mountain, an Egyptian temple in the middle of Sinai. 270 feet of this temple outside of a big cave, and equally as much cut within the mountain inside. And what they discovered that this mountain was all about, and what they actually found there secreted, was that the place was this temple was all about the manufacture of this strange powder. They found some of the powder there. The history of the use of the temple on top of this mountain seemed to stop very shortly after the time of Moses, but it had begun back in about 2,500 BC. So for about 1,500 years, this temple was a workshop manufacturing this powder. So throughout history, at various points in time, coming right up to Arizona today, we got these stories of, accounts of this powder made from gold.
Yes.
Now, the best references to it come from the Sinai inscriptions, and it's from those that actually such a lot has been learned in modern times about what this powder was supposed to be about. And they explain its various magical properties, about the things that it would cause. It would cause things to be able to levitate. It could move substances and material into other parallel dimensions. It was the place that apparently the pharaohs went to talk to the gods, this other dimension. And apart from all of that, they consumed it. They ate it. They ate this stuff. Made it into bread cakes. They called them bread cakes and ate it. And, I mean, there are some interesting references in Egypt at the Temple of Karnak. There's quite a sizable relief there that shows all the treasures of Pharaoh Thutmosis. And within the gold section of this this relief are these little conical things, and it says that these are gold, but we call them bread, and it's called mufkut, a very strange name. It doesn't mean anything in particular, it's just called mufkut. But they called them bread, and again, when we look at other parts of the culture where this seemingly was very much a part of the culture, and where the kings were meant to digest this stuff, and it would help their abilities for kingship, it would increase their awareness, their aptitude for intuition, all the sort of things that were meant to make them good kings and governors. I mean, it's not that it doesn't test as a drug of any sort, but it seems to have an effect on the DNA in some way. And one of the houses that seemingly used this to a great extent was the royal house of Judah, which of course is the Davidic house that Jesus came from. And one discovers that the royal house of Judah was originally called Bethlehem, which became the name of the place where David was meant to come from, and where Jesus' family had to go, to this place called Bethlehem, to do the national census. Well, the place called Bethlehem apparently evolved because the Davidic house itself was called Bethlehem, and Bethlehem means house of bread in Hebrew. And apparently it was the house of bread because it was the house of this substance again. They were using this stuff for various things. And so it has a very strange history. And oddly enough, when one puts it to the test in modern laboratories, one discovers that all of these things that it was said to be capable of, it is capable of. Medically, it's being researched at very high levels now across the globe. I mean, there's hardly a country that isn't researching monatomic gold now for medical treatments and medical use. It certainly does have an amazing effect on the DNA structure, and seemingly because its silica compound that it seems to be in final analysis has within it a light wave, very slow-moving light wave, oddly enough, which moves at exactly the same speed and replicates the light waves within our DNA structure. So what actually it can do is to travel within DNA, and it seems to have a restorative effect. So in areas of medicine where there are complaints, illnesses, diseases that are caused by breakdowns in the DNA structure, this stuff can actually help repair them. Now, I say this in a guarded fashion because there are a lot of ways on the internet where one can kind of buy a version of this sort of stuff.
Sure.
But it never is in the medical test. It certainly isn't a question of sort of, consuming some of this stuff that one can buy. It has to be injected, not orally and consumed. And what happens in the manufacture of it is that one loses 44% of the weight. So whatever gold weight you start with, you only end up with 56% of that. So if one imagines what an ounce of gold might cost in today's market, $600-700, whatever it is, and you're now going to lose 44% of that. So you're ending up with 56%, and you've got to make it up, to the next ounce or whatever. It's quite impossible to buy an ounce of this stuff through any internet source that you can buy for just $50 or $60.
Gotcha.
The price of gold itself is $600 or $700
yeah.
ounce before you even lose the $44. Now, I'm not decrying these products at all, because actually my experience of them, and I know many people who run companies that produce these things, and I've tested them, I've had them analyzed and whatever, they are pretty much exactly what they say that they are, but they're generally suspended in water or something like that to make up the weight, so the quantities aren't that great. The difference is that in the final analysis, for the monatomic gold to become what it actually can be in terms of what the ancients said it would do and in terms of what modern science says it will do, and has proved it can do, it has to go through a process that makes it entirely superconductive.
Really?
And that's a very expensive process that needs very expensive machinery to do. But once this stuff is superconductive, it does do some quite astonishing things. I mean, literally, as the Mesopotamian and pharaonic documents said, it can literally move into other dimensions. I mean, there are situations where one can have the stuff in a pan in the laboratory. Let's say you've got a little pyramid-y shape of this powder in this pan, and in terms of temperature, one just keeps lifting and lifting and lifting the temperature, and you can get up to extraordinary degrees with it, sun surface temperature heat, that sort of thing. But actually what happens is that the hotter it gets, the lighter it gets. And it actually reaches the point where it will disappear altogether. I mean, it will seem to levitate, but actually it's not it is levitating, but what's happening is that it's beginning to disappear in front of your eyes, and then it will disappear totally. So the scientists that doing the initial investigation thought, well, this is bad, kind of intriguing. The stuff is becoming invisible. And so to discover the truth of this, whether it was truly invisible, what they did was that they said, well, okay, but, before it disappears, we're going to have it in a very precise shape in the pan. We're going to have this beautiful little pyramid right in the middle. And it becomes invisible, and when it comes back into vision, it should look exactly the same. But what we're going to do while it's invisible is that we're going to get a wooden spatula and we're going to mess up the area of the middle of the pan where it was. So that when it comes back, of course, we will have missed it up because it was just invisible. It was still there.
Right. But
we couldn't see it. Well, what happened was that it was coming back exactly as it was before it disappeared. And that became even more intriguing. And what they decided was that it literally was moving into some sort of other dimension. It was going out of our space-time altogether. And that's kind of what the ancient documents said. In fact, the pharaohs were meant to go with it and come back with it. Right? Nobody these days has ever tried that, but I guess one day somebody brave might. But it was where they went to talk to the gods.
Right.
And the pyramid texts refer to it as the field of Mufkut. Now, that's, again, as with all of this, an interesting description, the field. I mean, why call it the field? It's a term that we use in modern science. They weren't talking about a grassy field. They were talking about this field as if it literally was some other dimension. So they talked about the field of Mufkut.
Yeah.
And so coming full circle in the story, we can go to another Egyptian document, the Book of the Dead, which is the oldest complete book in the world, actually. It's at the British Museum now. And there's a whole sequence in there where the pharaoh progresses along a sort of journey of enlightenment. And every time he's confronted by this substance, and he keeps asking the question, what is it? And then he moves on to another bit of enlightenment and comes to the end and says, what is it? Whatever it is that's giving him this enlightenment, he still doesn't know what it is. What is it? Well, interestingly enough, when one looks at Hebrew documents of the era and views stories of a similar process of enlightenment by way of what they called the bread, one discovers that the Hebrew